Let's continue now with 24 more words that I've hand selected for you to know that shouldn't have appeared in any of my other lists and are perfect for exams such as the GRE or just learning English in general. Starting with altercation, a noisy, heated, angry dispute. Oh, we got into an altercation over who should pay for the meal. Angry, loud argument, an altercation. The owner of the jewellers said there was an altercation in the store that resulted in a man being shot. A heated argument, not a civil one. Next word is ambrosial. Lovely word. Extremely pleasing to taste or smell. You have cooked an ambrosial meal, my kind mother. I believe the origins are to do with the kind of food that you would have if you were a Greek god. Ambrosia. So if something is ambrosial, it's extremely nice tasting or nice smelling and a wonderful compliment that you could give. Next word, amicable. Characterized by friendly goodwill. PEACEABLE. That's an amicable way of settling the dispute. Opposite of acrimonious that we saw earlier in the list. Acrimonious is harsh and unfriendly, whereas amicable is friendly, with goodwill. A good example would be there could be an acrimonious divorce or an amicable divorce. Maybe in an amicable divorce, the people stay friends, but not in an acrimonious one. In the example sentence, we have the disputes between England and her American colonies had reached a point at which no amicable adjustment was possible. It was not possible to stay friends, to keep it amicable. It was going to end in war. Amicable. Amity. Very similar, linked etymologically. Friendship. Friendly relations between nations is usually the meaning. You could say there is amity between me and my neighbour, but more likely between a group of people. Like a friendship, friendly relations between two groups. So there's two examples here. While there, Napoleon negotiated a treaty of amity and commerce with Prussia. Friendly relations between those two nations, France and Prussia, which is the old Germany. But you can use it for individuals, especially if you're saying something in a slightly formal way. He mentions in his will that he had lived almost 43 years in perfect amity with his wife, friendly relations. Notice the similarity. Amicable, friendship, goodwill, and amity, friendly relations, friendship. Bringing us to amorous, a more extreme version. Strongly moved by love, especially sexual love. The amorous attentions of someone, the sexual desire or lust for someone. Amor, I believe, is love. I'm not sure if it's Italian or Spanish, you can tell me in the comments. But it's a loving-like adjective, to be amorous. Here's the example. Descartes never married and had little of the amorous in his temperament. He wasn't interested in that kind of love. A bit like the Greek word eros. We're talking about a particular kind of attraction here with the word amorous. Way beyond friendship, beyond being amicable or having amity. We're talking about amorous relations here. Bringing us to amorphous, quite different now. So morph is shape, so to be amorphous means having no definite form or shape, to be shapeless. A lovely word to throw in there. If something doesn't have any clear structure or shape, you can call it amorphous. Astronomers think our solar system took shape when an amorphous interstellar cloud of dust, shapeless, just a big cloud, an amorphous interstellar between the stars, cloud of dust and gas, collapsed under its own weight. So this big cloud floating between the stars, this cloud of dust and gas, had no clear shape. It was all over the place. It was amorphous. Then it collapsed together, condensed, and formed our solar system. So great in this context to know the word. Amorphous. Anecdotal. I use this word all the time. Based on or consisting of reports or observations of usually unscientific observers. Basically not backed up by evidence, based on rumour, gossip, hearsay. Now, you're not necessarily insulting it. You're not saying, oh, it's definitely untrue, it's definitely spurious. No, you're just saying there's no empirical evidence. It's anecdotal, based on reports, based on what witnesses or observers say. We don't have actual clear evidence, though. It's anecdotal. Of course, an anecdote is a story that you can tell. So, oh, at a party I told that funny anecdote about you and your parents, that funny story. So that's the actual noun, an anecdote, a story. But for something to be anecdotal, it means it's a story based on what observers have seen, not necessarily the actual data, the information, the facts of the event. As you can imagine, you could use this word in many different circumstances. Let's look at the example sentence that I found. But you still were working with the biased, anecdotal opinions of a few people not very like you. So these opinions were based on observations, not actual facts. They were anecdotal, and as a bonus, they were biased. Now, not everything that's anecdotal is necessarily biased. Something could be anecdotal and true. Like there were anecdotal reports of a virus spreading in Wuhan, and it turned out to be true. Yes, there were stories and people talking on social media about it, and it turned out to be true. So saying something's anecdotal, you're not saying they're lying, you're just saying it's based on stories and reports and observations, not yet confirmed. Anew. You might have seen this word a lot, but I wanted to actually define it for you. Basically means for an additional time or again. Doing it afresh, doing it anew, doing it again. Like Aristotle then, he proposed anew the question, what is being? He proposed again the same question. So he's done it before, and now he's doing it a new time. And notice that it's an adverb, so coming with a verb. So the way you would use it is you'd pick a verb and then put anew after it to say that they're doing that thing one more time. They're doing it again a new time, a fresh time. He launched anew his company, suggesting he'd already launched it before, and now he's doing it a new time. Great little adverb to know there. Goes together with a verb. Animus. A usually prejudiced and often spiteful or malevolent ill will. She felt no animus towards those who had wronged her. To be spiteful, bitter, holding bad feelings for, almost hating the person. Almost like an evil spirit in you, an animating spirit that drives you against that person. So in this case, to have no animus towards those who had wronged her means she doesn't have that lingering demon, that feeling of spite, bitterness, ill will, wishing bad upon the other person. A bit like animosity, hatred between two people. A slightly stronger and shorter word is animus, animus between two people. Antecedent, a very interesting word. You have to define quite carefully. It's one who or that, could be a person or a thing, that precedes or goes before in different ways. It could be goes before in time, goes before in place, rank, order, or causality, as in the thing that causes the other thing. Now, this is used a lot in grammar, but we can also use it literarily, metaphorically. So that's why I've given two examples down below. The first one is, can you identify the antecedent that led to Jane's emotional breakdown? In other words, can you identify the thing that came before that caused Jane's emotional breakdown? So in this sense, we're talking about the antecedent being the thing that came before in terms of causality, one thing causing another. Ante, that start by the way, A-N-T-E, means before. So it kind of makes sense. The antecedent is the thing that comes before. A bit like the prefix pre. Pre also means before, which is where we get the word precede. Either way, let's look at the grammatical definition. So here we have the sentence, Mary saw John and thanked him. And John there is the antecedent of the pronoun him. It's the word that came before, grammatically, the pronoun him. When we use the word him in that sentence, Mary saw John and thanked him, the him is referring to something that came before earlier in the sentence, John. And so that makes John the antecedent. John is the word that came before that clarifies what we mean when we said him. Ante meaning before, so an antecedent is the thing or person which goes before, which precedes. Very handy little word there. Antediluvian. And now we get onto a much fancier, more creative word. Meaning made, evolved, or developed a long, long time ago. Technically, you might point out that ante means before, right? So doesn't this mean something about before? And it does. So deluge, or in this case diluvian, is the flood of Noah's flood in the Bible. So antediluvian means before that flood. So ancient it comes before Noah. Now obviously in real life we can't talk about something coming before the flood of Noah in history, but it just means metaphorically coming a long, long time ago, an ancient event. It's so old you could say it came before Noah. Antediluvian. So how might you use that in a sentence? Well, you could use it formally or informally. In this first sentence we have the extracts containing the Babylonian cosmology, their view of the universe, and a list of the antediluvian kings of Babylonia. As in we're saying, these kings were really ancient. They came a long, long time ago. They were antediluvian. Or using the word in a more fun way, we have here, my daughter often tells me I wear antediluvian clothes that are way out of style. As in that fashion is so ancient. You need to really change your ways. That was developed such a long time ago. Antediluvian. Apex, the uppermost point. She reached the apex of fame only to find out it wasn't what she expected. Apex, you're praising the thing. That's the highest thing, the apex of achievement. Usually when you're using this word, you're being metaphorical. You wouldn't often say the apex of the mountain, you'd say the summit of the mountain, but the apex of fame, the apex of stardom, the apex of wealth, the highest point. Or the politician had reached the apex of his powers, as high as it was going to go. Short word, but very powerful. Apogee, and I deliberately put this word next because it means something quite similar to apex, very similar to apex, but with a subtle difference. So the apogee is the furthest or highest point, the culmination. And because it means the furthest, going as far as you can, or the highest point, isn't it basically the same as apex then? Well, the difference in my mind comes with the next word, the culmination. Because when you say something has reached its apogee, you're saying that it's gone as far as it will go. It's reached its end stage, its final form. Like this is what it was destined to be. This is its greatest moment. This is how it will end. We've reached that point. The ending of the movie, the culmination, the apogee. Often suggesting that a decline is to come afterwards. We have achieved our goals. We are at the point that we were aiming for from the beginning. And so really there's nothing left to do after that. We've reached our apogee. Or in the example sentence, Aegean civilization, this ancient Grecian civilization, reached its apogee in Crete. Its final form. It would never again be the same. It would reach the apogee. I guess there is another way that you could distinguish apogee from apex, which is apogee has a suggestion that something's been building for a long, long time with a goal of reaching a certain thing. Whereas apex, it can come suddenly. Like overnight, she reached the apex of fame. So there's another thing to throw in the mix there to help you distinguish those two words. They are mostly interchangeable, but there are subtle differences there. To be appalled, affected by strong feelings of shock and dismay. I was appalled by the recent racist behaviour, said Boris Johnson. Or here, the Allied commanders were appalled to learn that 300 glider troops had drowned at sea. It's not just shock, It's also sadness, dismay, anger. So we're not just talking surprise, we're saying surprise that leads you to feeling sick in your stomach, dismayed, feeling awful. They were appalled. And notice I picked appalled rather than appall, because you much more often use the ED version of appalled rather than say, I appall her by my behaviour. You don't really hear that very much. You barely hear that actually. It's almost always with the ED. I was appalled, she was appalled, they were appalled. Don't ask me why, but I'm giving it to you how we say it in English. Appalled. Apparent. Now you may think this is a slightly easier word for this list. It's one of those words you're going to hear in a lot of different contexts, and many of my students would be confused as to how exactly they're using the word. So let's run through the three main definitions. First is just open to view, visible, clear and apparent. I could see that thing, it appeared before me, it is apparent. It is visible, it's not hidden. So the example sentence would be, the changes were readily or easily apparent. They were visible, they weren't invisible, they were easily apparent, clear to see. And now we move on to something a bit more metaphorical. What if something is visible to your mind? What if it's clear for your brain to understand, not necessarily your eyes to see? So that's the second definition, clear or manifest to the understanding, to your brain. So her reasons are apparent. I can understand them. They are apparent to me. I get what's going on. And then the final definition is almost like an evolution one step further. What if something appears in a certain way, but maybe it's not actually that thing? So yes, it appears that way. It's apparent, it's visible. But is that the real truth? And so that definition of apparent means it could be, that's what it seems, but we don't know for sure. So it seems it's manifest to the senses as real or true on the basis of evidence that may or may not be factually valid. So there's a slight cynicism now in this third definition of apparent. They died of an apparent heart attack. It seemed to be a heart attack. That's what's visible to me, but we don't know if it's true. And that's what's challenging for you as a student. It depends on the context as to what definition is being used. Notice with the first example, there's no cynicism, there's no doubt. The changes were readily apparent and we understood them. We're not implying it's false. But if you put a bit of emphasis on the word, especially verbally when you're saying it out loud, they died of an apparent heart attack, then you're kind of saying, well, yes, that's what's visible, but is that the real truth? What I'm saying, to sum up, therefore, is it depends on the tone, either of the voice of the person speaking or in an exam, the context in which the words appear. Is this a skeptical context, in which case the third definition of apparent is being used? Or is it a reporting, clear, honest, transparent assessment, in which case we're either talking about the first one being visible to the eyes, or the second definition, visible to the brain, clear to the brain? So I thought I wanted to unpack the word apparent a bit for you guys. Moving on though, to appreciable, capable of being discerned by the senses or intellect. And yes, there are similarities there with the word apparent. But with apparent, we're talking about something being clearly appreciable, clearly seen to the eyes or to the brain. Whereas appreciable, we're talking right on the borderline. It's just about capable of being discerned. We can just about see it or smell it or touch it, but only just. It's appreciable. And no, we're not talking about to appreciate, which is why I picked this word. Some people get confused and think it means to appreciate, to value, to love that thing. I really appreciate her. No, this is different. This is appreciable. It means just about being able to be discerned by your senses or by your brain. So how would you use it? Let's take the first sentence. There isn't any appreciable difference between this musical piece and that one. As in, maybe there is a difference, but it's so small, it's not appreciable. I can't actually sense it. I can't tell the difference. There isn't any appreciable difference. Or let's look at the next sentence. Friday's total is part of a trend towards improving numbers since February. when vaccinations against the virus began to have an appreciable effect and cases started plummeting. So notice before February, the vaccinations maybe had an effect, but in February, that's when they first had an appreciable effect, as in we could first tell what was going on. We can first see the numbers really change. Before, it was negligible. That's the word you would use, so small that you couldn't trace it. But after that, when it builds, it's not negligible anymore, it's appreciable. You can appreciate it, you can sense it, you can see it. And that's the difference there. Ardent, an easier word to explain, characterized by warmth of feeling, typically expressed in eager zealousness, passion, support, or activity. To be ardent. I am an ardent admirer of that celebrity. I have warmth towards them and passionate about them. As in this example, social media has been the only way her ardent, passionate supporters have been able to see updates on her life. Full of ardour, A-R-D-O-R, full of passion, zealousness, zeal, warmth of feeling, to be an ardent supporter of someone, or an ardent admirer, usually in a positive sense. You wouldn't say ardent about something negative. So a fairly simple word there, a 6-letter word that we can just chuck into our vocab list. Ardour, there we go, just exactly the one I was talking about, linked obviously with ardent. The only difference then, the only reason why I had a separate entry into this list is because there is a slight sense that it won't last very long. When you use the word ardour, to have ardour towards something, you're saying there's passion there, intense passion, but because it's intense, maybe it won't last forever. It might be transitory, which is a word meaning temporary. It's restless, so it will come, go, maybe come again. Slightly capricious. This in itself was enough to damp the ardour of my enthusiasm, damp the intensity of my enthusiasm. Whereas in my opinion, the word ardent doesn't carry that connotation. If you're ardent, you are just genuinely passionate and you probably will stay that way. But if you have ardour, there's a degree of intensity, almost crazy passion, but it might not last. A fleeting affection, maybe an infatuation that doesn't last forever. Artifice, clever or cunning devices or expedients, especially as used to trick or deceive others. A bit like the word artificial. Artificial means fake. Now, if something's artificial, you're not necessarily saying that in a negative way. You're not saying this artificial limb, it's fake, it's not a real limb, it's a cheat. No, it's just human-made, it's synthetic, it's artificial. But the word artifice means a deliberate trick, a clever or cunning deception. So there is a negative connotation there for artifice that isn't necessarily there for artificial. And this is how you might use it. I was pleased when the car salesman did not use any artifice, any trick, to try and get me to purchase a defective vehicle. Or another sentence. In this he succeeded, though not without a good deal of artifice, cunning, more creditable to his ingenuity than to his virtue. As in that artifice, that trick, we should give him praise not for his virtue, because that was a bad thing that he did, but praise and credit to his ingenuity, his cleverness for coming up with that trick. That's what that sentence means. Essentially, trickery. She used a great deal of artifice to get that job. A great deal of trickery, cunning. In fact, the word itself, if you use it in a sentence, you might come across as a bit clever, cunning. Yes, I use artifice all the time, for example. Askance, very funny word. With disapproval or distrust, scornfully. To look askance. And notice again, it's an adverb, so it goes together with a verb. Almost always about looking with your eyes. So to look askance at someone, you know that look, you can picture it in your mind. When someone looks at you with disapproval, maybe out of the corner of their eye, kind of like, oh, them. I'm sure you can picture the scene if you see maybe a drunk man being really rude in the street and some people look askance at them. They're looking out of their corner of their eye or looking sideways towards that person with disapproval, distrust, looking down at that person scornfully. An adverb again, so it goes with the verb. So the sentence would be, many critics have looked, there's the verb, askance. That's the adverb. Many critics have looked askance at the proposal. They don't like it, they disapprove it. Or, they eyed, that's the verb, the stranger askance. They eyed the stranger askance. So they're eyeing, they're looking at the stranger askance with disapproval or distrust. So askance always has to be paired with a verb to do with looking. Assent, to give assent. To agree to or approve of something, such as an idea or a suggestion, especially after you've thought about it and considered it. You can give your immediate assent to something, but more likely if you give assent, it's to something that you've thought about that's a bit debatable, and then you're going to go, yes, I've thought, and I'm going to say yes to that thing. It's not a million miles away from the word to consent to something, to agree to do that thing. Assent is maybe a bit more formal. I give my affirmation and assent to that. Or she gave her assent to the proposal. Maybe the request is quite serious, so you should give some time to think about whether it's the right thing to do, as in the next example sentence. The policeman asked if I would assent to a search of my vehicle, asked if I would agree to it, but not just agree because this is a tough thing. Maybe you want to think about it. So think about whether you're going to give your assent to that thing, your thoughtful agreement to it. Maybe a local council asked to tear down a building, and the neighbours gathered together, discuss, and then eventually gave their assent, gave their thoughtful agreement. And now we have assimilate, to take into the mind and thoroughly understand. So mentally, you can assimilate information by absorbing it and understanding it. But it doesn't have to be in your mind. An immigrant can assimilate into a culture, to absorb into that cultural tradition of a population or group. So some immigrants assimilate very easily. They're absorbed and contribute to that culture very easily. 2 definitions for the price of 1. You can take something into your mind and understand it, or take something into a population and absorb it. So we have the first example sentence. She paused, allowing him to assimilate the information, giving him time to think about and understand the information. Or using the second definition, tolerant hosts would be able to assimilate immigrants of whatever creed, belief, or colour. Absorb them, promote them within your population to assimilate those immigrants. And now for astringent. Almost sounds harsh, doesn't it? Well, that's what it means. Harsh in disposition, attitude, or character. To be astringent. He was a very astringent man. Second definition is literally bitter, acidic, when you're tasting something or smelling something. More often nowadays, you see the word used metaphorically, just to be harsh in general, like a person. Linked to the word stringent, meaning strict, like a stringent head teacher. To be astringent is harsh. So you would get sentences such as, an astringent critic of modern movies. That's the first definition. They're a very harsh critic. Or literally, fresh blackcurrants have a rather astringent flavour. It's a bitter, acidic flavour. So you can see the word came from something literal, meaning an acidic taste of something like blackcurrants. The word evolved to mean just harsh in general, so a human can be astringent. You can see almost how the word has evolved. And finally for today, atonement. To make atonement, make amends, reparation, pay something back, expiation, to have your sins forgiven, made from wrong or injury. So you've done something wrong and now you need to atone. You need to seek atonement, to make up for it. Pay back what you did, to make amends. How you'd use it in a sentence would be, no amount of atonement or misgiving, feeling bad, makes any difference to the survivors. So a person can seek to make atonement, to make amends, to give back what they've stolen maybe, to seek forgiveness, but obviously people might not necessarily give them that, or feel that it's enough. So a thief, as an act of atonement, might come to the victim's house and hand over some money because they're trying to make reparations for what they've done wrong, to give back, to pay back what they've done wrong. And that's a suitably noble and solemn word to end today's list. As you can see, I went into a bit more detail today, but there were a lot of stunningly interesting words. So I wanted to give you more context on those words, more definitions, more examples. Either way, I've had a lot of fun creating this list, so I hope to do many, many more. As you can see, I'm still on the letter A, so there's a lot left to go. Really hope you enjoy it. See you next time.